millions of Americans trying to protest peacefully, as is our right, as is your right in India. And yet the president treats them all like terrorists. In many ways, India and the United States share many traits. We were both subjects of the British Empire. We both liberated ourselves from that empire in different centuries, but we did. I've always admired India. I've always admired the multiracial, multi-religious aspect of Indian society. And so countries sometimes have to go through a discussion and a political debate about who are we? At the core, what kind of nation are we? We're an immigrant nation. We're a tolerant nation.
I mean, I think the thing we share, and I think why our partnership works, is because we are tolerant systems. You mentioned that you're an immigrant nation. We are a very tolerant nation. Our DNA is supposed to be tolerant. We're supposed to accept new ideas. We're supposed to be open. But the surprising thing is that that open DNA is sort of disappeared. I mean, I say this with sadness that I don't see that level of tolerance that I used to see. I don't see it in the United States, and I don't see it in India.
I think you've identified a central issue, at least for the United States. And the silver lining here, the good news is that we have people demonstrating all across the country in every major city in the United States this week, peacefully, on behalf of tolerance, inclusion, minority rights, all these essential issues at the core of our democracy. And I think one advantage is that we democracies have, say, over an authoritarian country like China, is that we can correct ourselves as a self-corrective part of our national DNA in India and the United States. And as all democracies, we resolve this at the ballot box in free and fair elections. We do not turn to violence. We do this peacefully. That's the India tradition that we love about India from your founding. Yeah. In the 1930s, the protest movement, the Salt March, all the way to 1947 and 48.
I feel that this division which occurs is actually tremendously weakening for the country. But the people who do the division portray it as the strength of the country. When you divide African Americans, Mexicans, and other people in the United States, or you divide Hindus and Muslims and Sikhs in India, you're weakening the structure of the country. But then the same people who weaken the structure of the country say that they're the nationalists.
Well, I think that's what President Trump is all about. He wraps himself in a flag. He declares that he alone can fix the problems. I must say, I think President Trump is in many ways an authoritarian personality. But in our country, you're seeing the institutions remain strong. Mm-hmm. The military clearly saying over the last few days, individual senior military leaders, we will not put American military troops onto the streets. That's the function of the police forces, not the military force. We'll abide by the Constitution. The senior military officer, General Mark Milley, said this week, Americans have a right to protest. They have a right to disagree with the government. These are so fundamental. It's extraordinary we have to even debate these. So we're back to debating first principles. Mm-hmm. But again, I do see strengths that democracies go through trials. We play out our differences in political campaigns or in street protests, but at least we can do that. You can see authoritarianism coming back in China, in Russia. And we democracies, we sometimes go through painful episodes because of our freedoms, but we're so much stronger because of them. That's our advantage, I think, inherently over the authoritarian country.
I think the Indian American community is a real asset for us and an asset for you. So it's a joint asset, and it's a good bridge to have. How does one think about that going forward?
Well, I think that to mention something you said before, Rahul, our military relationship is very strong. If you think about the U.S.-India naval and Air Force cooperation in the Bay of Bengal and throughout the entire Indian Ocean region, we're really together, and this gives me hope. But you're right, it can't be just about that. And so my advice would be, but I would look forward to your thoughts, is keep the doors open to each other. lower the restrictions on the movement of peoples between the two countries. I think H-1B visas, where a lot of university, high-tech Indian business people come to the United States on H-1B visas, they've been severely limited in recent years. We simply don't have enough engineers in the United States to run our economy. And India can supply many of those engineers. I'd keep the barriers low. I would encourage the movement of people, encourage university exchanges, and certainly encourage us to be working together on democracy promotion around the world, on science, on public health issues. If there's another pandemic in our future, and there most likely is, of some sort, our two countries could be doing a lot more together in terms of vaccine for poorer members of our society. I'd like to see our relationship go in that direction as well.
Why do you think that in this COVID crisis, and I say this for most countries, including India and the United States, why do you think there has been almost no cooperation?
I think you and I have talked about this before. It's a terrible, terrible disappointment to me. I'm sure it is to you. This crisis was made for the G20. It was made for Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping and Donald Trump to be working together, all of our countries, for the common global good. All of us are confronted. Every Indian American is vulnerable to this disease. And I would have thought at the beginning of the crisis, I would have predicted that countries would have put down their differences and worked for a vaccine together, or how to distribute that vaccine in an equitable and humane fashion. And it hasn't happened, mainly because Donald Trump doesn't really believe in international cooperation. He's a unilateralist. He wants America to go it alone in the world. And Xi Jinping chose to compete with Trump. Been the US and China at the heart of the problem here. And I hope when the next crisis comes, we'll do better to work together in a more effective way.
And it's the same. It's the same in Europe. I mean, one sees the same friction between Germany, Italy, the United Kingdom that one sees across the world. So there is something happening in the world where people are going into themselves, becoming insular. And I think this COVID crisis has accelerated that sense. So there is this atmosphere of fear. You take unilateral decisions. You do the biggest lockdown in the world, most rigorous lockdown in the world, and then you have millions and millions of your manual laborers working thousands of kilometers back home. So it's this unilateral, episodic type of leadership where you just come and do something and go away. It's very, very destructive.
We are not looking for a conflict with China, but we are waging, in a way, a battle of ideas with China. We can't decouple ourselves or de-link ourselves from China. I would love to hear your thoughts on this.
I'd say cooperative competition without ever going into violence. Yes, they have a different worldview. Yes, they have an authoritarian worldview. Yes, we have a democratic worldview. And I'm pretty confident that the democratic worldview will do well. But in order to achieve that, that has to start from inside our countries. We can't have a authoritarian perspective internally and then make that argument. That argument has to be made from the foundation of democracy within the country itself, within our countries. And that's where I see the problem, that it becomes very difficult for us to, from our perspective, to make an argument of democracy when our institutions are being torn apart, when our people are scared, when millions of people in our country are terrified of what's going to happen to them. The most important battle, from our perspective, yours and ours, is to actually bring back our countries to where they used to be, which is sort of where we embrace our cultures, where we embrace our past, where we embrace our people, and where we sort of, we give a healing touch, as opposed to this sort of aggressive politics that we're stuck in. COVID is a horrible time, but I do see new ideas emerging after COVID. New ways. I can already see people cooperating much more than they were before. Now they realize that actually there are advantages to being unified. There are advantages to helping each other. So that is there. How do you think COVID is going to shape the balance of power? What is going to happen, in your view, between the United States, China, Russia, India? What is going to be the effect of COVID?
That we set aside
यूट्यूब चैनल को सब्सक्राइब करके घंटी का बटन जरूर दबाना। खबरें कैसी लगी, अच्छी या फिर खराब, कमेंट्स जरूर करना। आपके कमेंट्स का इंतजार करेंगे। धन्यवाद।